King Duncan shares with us a story about a husband and a wife who are discussing their living wills. The husband is adamant about his desires. "Just so you know," he says, "I will never want to live in a vegetative state, dependent on some machine and fluids from a bottle. If I ever get to that state, I just want you to pull the plug." His wife sat there and thought about it for a moment, then got up, unplugged the TV, and threw out all the beer. Some of us know somebody who's in that kind of vegetative state. But today, we want to talk about freedom. As a matter of fact, all 4 of my sermons in July will focus on the meaning and purpose of freedom. This week, we celebrate our nation's independence. As well we should. What a precious gift. We begin to understand the use of freedom through the words of Paul in Galatians chapter 5. For a long time now, I have believed the newly arrived immigrants, especially those fleeing from places of tyranny and oppression, understand the meaning and value of freedom in many ways that us here for generations do not. In the book, My America, news reporter Lucy Yang recalls her family's immigration to the United States when she was just 2 years old. Her parents came here looking for opportunities that they could not find in their native Taiwan. Yang is sensitive to the sacrifices many immigrants make in order to come to this country. She tells about a ship called the Golden Venture that came too close to shore in 1993 and ran aground in Fair Rockaway, New York. The ship was filled with desperate people from China. These men and women willingly sold their souls for a chance in America. Agreeing to the smuggler's ransom, they knew the sun would set on their working days before their debt was ever extinguished, but they believed the sun would rise anew for their children. The captain, fearful of getting caught when the ship grounded, pushed his passengers into the ocean. Within sight of their promised land, these desperate would-be immigrants and their dreams vanished in the waves. Lucy Yang says she remembers those souls every November when she casts her vote. There is no greater gift under heaven than freedom. We should never take our freedom for granted, both our political freedom and our freedom in Jesus Christ. Freedom comes in many forms. Radiator commentary Paul Harvey once told about a group of scientists who were determined to teach a chimpanzee to write. For 14 years, the scientists labored diligently and patiently with this chimpanzee, providing things in its cage to enable it to form certain syllables. Finally, the day arrived when it seemed that the chimpanzee was actually going to construct a sentence from the syllables it had been learning. Word went out, and other scientists crowded into the room and gathered around the cage. The scientists could hardly contain themselves as they pressed around the cage to read the history-making sentence. Here is what the chimpanzee had written. "Let me out." If I told you that beginning today you could be freer than you had ever been before, would that interest you? You see, in our lesson from Galatians, St. Paul writes, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free." In other words, freedom is God's will for us. Freedom from tyranny, all kinds of tyranny. God simply wants you to be free. In Galatians 5, Paul speaks bluntly of the tyranny of sin. He writes, "You, my brothers, were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the sinful nature. Rather, serve one another in love. The entire law is summed up in a single command. Love your neighbor as you yourself. If you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out or you will be destroyed by each other. So I say, live by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the sinful nature. For the sinful nature desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the sinful nature. They are in conflict with each other, so that you do not want to do what you want." Some of the early believers had been pagans before they began following Jesus, and they wanted to hold on to some of their traditions after their baptisms. But their traditions included sinful habits not conducive to the lifestyle of of a follower of Jesus. Paul rightly saw that there is no slavery more odious than the slavery of sin. Ask someone who is addicted to drugs or to any other destructive habit. Many of them will go to desperate measures for what they call a fix. The monkey on my back is what heroin addicts call their addiction. It's a habit which grows to the point that it nearly squeezes the life out of them. Christ wants us to be free. An army chaplain tells the story of reaching a young man just before he died on a battlefield in Vietnam. It was evident as he held the boy's hand that the young soldier had been mortally wounded. These were the last moments of his life, so the chaplain tried to console him the best he knew how. "Son," he said, "is there anything I can do for you?" "No," the young soldier replied, as the memories of his life passed before his eyes. "Sir, what I need now is someone who can undo some things for me." How sad it is when we look back over our lives and see so many things we wish we could undo. Mae West once said, "I used to be Snow White, but I drifted." Maybe you too have drifted. Maybe there are some things in your life that you regret. Do you remember John Wayne Gacy? During the day he worked as a clown, bringing joy and laughter into the lives of hundreds of children around Chicago. At night he was a cold-blooded killer of 32 teenage boys. One day there was a knock on the door. It was the police. When Gacy opened the door, his first comment was, "Thank God you have come." You see, Gacy couldn't bear to live with the dark secrets of his life anymore. For him, it was a relief to confess. I like how United Methodist preacher Billy Strayhorn describes what he calls the paradox of freedom. Though it sounds paradoxical, true freedom comes only through surrender. For an athlete or a dancer, it is surrender to the physical discipline of exercise. For a musician, it is surrender to the discipline of practice. Christian freedom comes through the surrender of all we are and all we have to Christ, who surrendered all on the cross for our salvation. Surrendering ourselves to Christ to be free may seem like a paradox, but think of it in terms of boarding a cruise ship. Everybody knows the destination. The passengers have surrendered themselves to it. No one's in chains. Everyone is completely free to go where they want and do whatever they want. They can eat, they can sleep, they can play, they can lounge about on the deck, read, talk, whatever. They can do whatever they please within the environment of the cruise ship. And the whole time, the cruise ship continues to carry them towards the destination. Both freedom and surrender are present, and they don't contradict. That's sort of what it's like when we surrender our lives to Christ. We give ourselves to God's will and God's destination for our lives. Within the environment of God's will, we're free to do whatever. In short, freedom is self-control, self-determination, and self-direction through self-surrender to Christ. Strayhorn tells another story. One Sunday morning at a Texas prison, a group of inmates were being led to the Catholic and Protestant chapels. One prisoner didn't enter either chapel, but kept on walking towards the main gate. A guard caught up with him and asked, "Hey fella, where do you think you're going?" The prisoner replied, "I was told I could go to the church of my choice, and it's in Denver." Aren't we all just like that inmate? We all want our freedom, and we don't want anyone to take it away from us. Paul writes, "For freedom, Christ has set us free." Like the inmate, we all want our freedom. A life of freedom begins with the recognition of who we are and what our situation is. The biblical witness is that we're helpless to fill the emptiness within our lives by ourselves. The Son of God has already paid the price to free each of us from our bondage to sin. All we can do is receive and accept that which God freely gives through allowing Christ to turn us around. Our challenge is to accept the freedom which Christ offers. As you come for Holy Communion this morning, think about those people who have gone before us and have made the freedom we have possible. Then think about those things which keep you from giving your whole life to Christ. Think about them and surrender them to Christ. Leave them at the altar and leave unburdened and free. For freedom, Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self-indulgence, but through love become slaves to one another. Live by the Spirit and be guided by the Spirit. Amen.